The situation is obviously very volatile in Syria. It is very good that Assad is gone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that what follows is settled by any means at all. It is really important we talk to our regional allies, our global allies, about the way forward, which has to be a political way forward. And that does mean, to answer your question, a rejection of terrorism, a rejection of violence. So we have to be really clear about the terms. Very early days, but they're the discussions that we're having with our allies.
Shocking secret documents have just become known that cast doubt on the ties of the stamp with Syria and Saudi Arabia. This could be a real disaster for Labour. We have information about how these revelations may affect the fate of the party, and you should be with us at this important stage. The history of Starmer's Middle Eastern ties is something absolutely incredible. Starmer's words and actions just don't match. He loudly condemns human rights violations, but at the same time supports regimes that are known for their monstrous abuses. We got our hands on explosive leaked documents, and they can cause a real shock. They reveal a tangled web of deals between Labour, Syria and Saudi Arabia. And the most terrible thing, the Labour Party was actively involved in ending investigations into human rights violations in Saudi Arabia.
We've just heard from the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
I welcome the fact that Assad has gone. The Syrian people had to put up with his brutal regime for far, far too long. We're talking to regional allies. It's very important now that there's a political settlement, a political way forward. And it's very, very important that we emphasise that civilians and minorities must be protected in this process. But very, very pleased that Assad has fallen.
The rebel group which has taken Syria is viewed as a terror group by the government. Your government says it has links to al-Qaeda. Will your government deal with this new Syrian?
The party that was supposed to be the defender of ordinary people actually turns out to be an accomplice to terrible crimes. Starmer's team is making tremendous efforts to hush up any reports that might expose them and their Saudi allies in a disgusting light. They don't just put pressure on investigators, they edit documents and even threaten whistleblowers. Orders come from the very top levels, and these are not just random actions, this is a large-scale concealment of information. We are talking about systematic attempts to hide the truth from British society, and what we have already found out is just the tip of the iceberg. You're probably wondering what deals Starmer made with Saudi Arabia to justify this disgusting cover-up. This includes millions of pounds, contracts for the supply of weapons, and a complete disregard for some truly terrible facts. We're going to tell you about it, and it's going to make you really angry. But that's not all. Starmer's ties to Syria are even more disturbing. We are talking about deals that could threaten the national security of the UK, and this is what we are going to discuss next time. So, here it is, Starmer's progressive image is starting to crack, and what lies beneath it is completely unattractive.
Regime.
Well, it's very early days at the moment. We do need a political solution to this, and that's what we're talking to regional allies about. It is a good thing that Assad is gone, a very good thing for the Syrian people. What we must also ensure as we go through this, the rejection of terrorism and violence, that civilians are protected, minorities are protected, and that can only be through a political process. That's what we're talking to allies in the region about at the moment.
You're in the region. Are you expecting any sort of communication with that new regime, or have you had any so far?
Well, it's very early days. At the moment, our engagement is with our allies, making sure that we're making that case for a political settlement here. We have to see this as an opportunity for the future of Syria, the future that's been denied for so long, that's a future without the terrorism and violence that we've seen far too much of in this brutal regime. So it's a real opportunity. We're talking to regional allies about how we take that opportunity for a political settlement here, but it's very, very...
The question is, how long can Starmer continue this hypocritical game? And more importantly, what are we, the British public, going to do about it? But do you remember how he condemned the Assad regime? So, there is much more hidden in this story than it seems at first glance. We have convincing evidence that Syrian intelligence officers have received visas to the UK. The very people that Starmer says he opposes are now moving freely around our country. And guess where the trail leads? Straight to Starmer's team. It's just incredible, isn't it? Those who are supposed to protect us are actually putting us at risk. Agencies such as My5 should evaluate candidates and identify any potential threats to national security. But somehow these Syrian operatives were able to escape control. This is not just a mistake or misunderstanding. We are talking about a serious threat to the security of the UK. These are not ordinary tourists or immigrants. These are trained intelligence officers associated with a regime known for its brutal tactics. So let's take what these operatives may be up to in the UK. Experts warn that they may be gathering information about Syrian dissidents living in the country or trying to influence UK politics from within. The possibilities are terrifying, and it's all happening right in front of our eyes. But here's the real question that haunts security analysts. How deep is Starmer's connection to Syrian intelligence? The potential consequences of these actions are simply staggering.
There are many celebrating tonight. You yourself say you welcome the departure of President Assad. Are you concerned that this could be destabilising for the region? Is it something you expect to discuss while you're here in the area?
Look, I'm very pleased that Assad has gone. I think we should all welcome that. It was a brutal regime imposed on Syrians for far, far too long. So it is good that he's gone. That should be welcome. But it is important now that we stabilise, that we reject violence and terrorism, and that we all work towards a political solution to this, a political settlement for the future of Syria and, of course, for the region.
And let's not forget about the human losses. Think of the Syrian refugees who, fleeing the horrors of war, sought refuge in the United States and eventually in the UK. They hoped for safety, but instead discovered that the very regime they were fleeing might have agents watching their every move. This is a betrayal of everything our country is fighting for. Starmer is not just maneuvering around the UK security service, he is actively undermining the very principles of democracy abroad. Although Starmer claims to support democracy abroad, our investigation shows a completely different picture. We have found evidence that Labour's actions are undermining democratic movements in the Middle East, harming real people who are fighting for their freedom. In Egypt, Tunisia and Lebanon, ordinary activists feel abandoned by Labour, and this is simply unacceptable. We tracked the cash flows, and the results were shocking.
It says the developments in Syria in recent hours and days are unprecedented, and we are speaking to our partners in the region and monitoring the situation closely. It goes on, the Syrian people have suffered under Assad's barbaric regime for too long, and we welcome his departure. Our focus is now on ensuring a political solution prevails and peace and stability is restored. We call on all sides to protect civilians and minorities and ensure essential aid can reach the most vulnerable in the coming hours and days. So that, in the last few minutes, a statement from Prime Minister Keir Starmer on the situation in Syria, clearly saying that they welcome this news, they are monitoring the situation, calling Assad's regime barbaric and welcoming his departure. A reminder, Russia announced that he had fled Syria.
The multi-million-dollar aid, which was supposed to be a salvation, actually strengthened the very power structures that activists are fighting against. In Lebanon, foreign funding, including funds from the UK, often goes to support the old political elites, rather than real reforms. The support of the West, including from the Labour Party, has not led to significant changes. One Tunisian activist bitterly said, "We thought the revolution would bring democracy, but now we are facing political instability and an economic crisis." How painful it is to hear that.
Yeah, just overnight, rebel forces say Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad fled Damascus as they took control of the capital, and he has not been seen since this morning.
You hear it there. The news met with celebration across Syria and beyond. The gunfire there in celebration as rebel supporters cheered in the streets and they tore down monuments to the Assad family.
The situation in Syria is no less alarming. Dr. Rim Tamani, a well-known activist, expressed deep disappointment that the rebel leadership does not reflect the interests of the majority of Syrians and there is a lot of blood on their hands. However, Starmer's team seems to care more about maintaining stability than supporting real democratic movements. One Egyptian activist bitterly stated, "We thought Britain stood for democracy, but when we needed support the most, Labour turned its back on us." This is simply unbearable. How was Starmer able to undermine these movements, putting economic interests above political reforms and fawning over stable but authoritarian regimes? This approach is changing the political landscape of the Middle East, creating a generation disillusioned with democracy. They have seen firsthand how easily it can be betrayed by those who claim to support it. Share your thoughts in the comments. See you.